How we doing, YouTube? Nice to see you. Sean McMahon here. Doing a little bit of drive time commusing, shall we say. I'm on my way to my weekly Wednesday gig at the News from America in Edgartown. I think I'm going to put out an album called The News from America because I've been recording some of my sets there, and I've been sorting through some of the better takes of my own music as well as some covers of classic tunes. So where are we at? It's Wednesday. It's about to be Palm Sunday. I wrote a Palm Sunday piece which my subscribers will get. Subscribers to my Substack, realseanmcmahon.substack.com, and I'll probably put out an accompanying video. So the thing is, my sermons, I don't always list the Bible references and whatnot, but in the Substack articles I will, so paid subscribers can get like the whole article instead of just like the audio version, shall we say. But talking about Palm Sunday coming, it just calls to mind, you know, what the world looks for when it comes to peace and justice and all this stuff. Like, look no further than what the United States is going through. We're going through a period of reform. In the United States, we're trying to do some economic reforms right now, which are really stirring the pot with Trump and whatnot. And you know, people call it a trade war. The other way to look at it is just a renegotiation of the terms of the world order, because, you know, there are different ways to look at globalism, shall we say, because globalism, we associate it with its current form, but its current form is not necessarily what it's always been. And anyone with a memory long enough to remember will remember that pretty much everything Trump has promised, or at least I should say like 70% of it, was essentially not too different from the Democratic platform in the 90s. Which is why so many, you know, like Gen X people and boomers, of course, sort of moved over to the Republican Party after the Democrats drifted left. But with regards to globalism and the world order, you know, what we essentially have is like, you know, a sort of codependent system of relationships that are complex. And so everyone's sort of going to get all panicked, you know, when that's disrupted, as it is right now with all these tariffs. Call it a trade war if you want, but another way to look at it, like I said, is a renegotiation of world relationships, because you can't just kill globalism in the sense that you could kill relationships between nations. That's impossible. You know, Jesus taught the parable of the Good Samaritan in order to teach love of neighbor, right? So we can't just despise other people because they're from different nations. And I don't think that the end game with Trump is to completely isolate America. It's essentially to establish boundaries. And these are boundaries that have been sorely lacking. And the reason I'm talking about this in a generally religious podcast is because I think it's important to have perspective with history. And tariffs, like them or not, there's a precedent for them in the American system, and they did well for us before the days of the income tax. I believe it was in 1913 that America developed an income tax, and the economy crashed not too long after that. But that's all to say, you know, it just depends on how you want to gather your nation's wealth, the wealth of nations, and upon whom you're going to place that burden. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to take care of your own family and your own home, you know, you don't pass off that cost to your own children. And what brings the added layer of complexity to the political way of looking at this is Donald Trump as a president is not our father. We don't have a father in America. You know, like, neither formal, symbolic, or otherwise. So the government is not our parent. That's very important, and that concept has such a long history, and it goes back to the Gospels. That's why I bring it up, because you have to take care of your own home. You do, and you can establish rules and boundaries about who is welcome in your home. And the Christian faith teaches us that we need to be pretty liberal about that. At the same time, you judge things by their fruits. And if people have been crying out for change in America because something has changed, or something that was working before isn't working as well, and if you know your history, you know that there is something to the statement, "Make America Great Again," because there was greatness there. There were rules and levers and means by which that greatness was shed by the grace of God upon the nation. And I think that's all that Trump's trying to go back to. Now, whether he's right or wrong is a broader question, insofar as God shed his grace upon many other nations, and many other nations have been great for the past 2,000 years. There are many paths to greatness, dare I say. But the way the world works, no nation is in a vacuum. So you can't just define your own terms per se and walk your own way and hope that everything's going to turn out great for you. So where we're at today is Trump's establishing boundaries on our behalf. There's going to be a market adjustment. We're switching up our diet, so to speak. Where our input, I'm trying to think of like a food metaphor, but like we're shifting where our food comes from, because we don't know where it comes from. But if we do it in-house, we know better, right? So we're incentivizing ourselves to do American-made stuff and all that. But anyway, I guess I might be a little too brief because I have a destination to get to. But there are other aspects of this that tie into larger ripples in the stock market, world markets, and how that's going to affect monetary value and therefore monetary policy. And I think that's where things are going to get interesting, if not exciting. So if anyone, like conservative or liberal, is just worried about what's going on, because the past week people are talking about economics especially, guys, leave it to God. Like, Trump's not God. He's just doing what he's doing. He's working on a solution. And tariffs are not ungodly, okay? They're not. And it's up to the diplomats of the world about whether they want to turn this into a trade war, which is what the media are trying to present it as, or whether it's simply a renegotiation of dynamics of relationships. You know, there's a diplomatic subtext to what's going on here, because let's put it this way: we as Americans are paying taxes to receive services, you know, hopefully to be rendered by government, you know, and it's supposed to be accountable to us. But what we're finding out every day is that those services are not rendered to us, and rather our money is used to render services to others in other countries. So, to put it bluntly and plainly, America is feeding the world. The world is quite reliant on America. And you can view it as unfair, you know, that we're taking this position we have, leveraging it, and Americans are somehow paying the price for our own independence, which is fine, by the way, or that we're somehow harming other countries by, you know, stopping the gravy train. On the other hand, the other countries deserve better too. So I think this will all get sorted out. I'm an optimist, not because of Donald Trump alone. I hope he does well. I wish him well. Pray for him all the time, just like I prayed for Joseph R. Biden and Barack Hussein Obama, you know. But it'll be okay, because the lilies of the field, folks. This is God's world. This is God's kingdom. He is the King of Kings. The kingdoms of the world are the kingdom of Christ. So Donald Trump, while elected to serve the people of America, he also bears the burden of serving God. he will one way or another, whether it's in fidelity or whether it's as a vessel of destruction. So pray for the former. Pray for the former. And we ourselves as American citizens are vested with our own level of authority and power. And so we need to look at ourselves as little kings and queens civically in America, because the American system was sort of designed to incarnate the Protestant vision of the priesthood of all believers, the royal priesthood of all believers. That's why the Puritans, etc., were so attracted to the idea of democracy, because the royal priesthood of all believers sort of presumes that each head of household, a head of family, is a king of his own little kingdom. And so why appoint another king over your head is how their logic went. And, this is the same group of people that wouldn't tolerate, icons or anything. So it's a reductive way of looking at things, and some would argue regressive, but nonetheless, the ideas are basic, and therefore we have a more basic type of thing going on in America, elective representative democracy. So that's all to say, when Christians are to pray for their leaders, pray for Donald Trump, no doubt, but also pray for yourselves, y'all. Like, we elect these people into power, and we have a say. And to the extent that we don't have a say, we really have to pray for those so-called elected individuals. Not just the presidents, but those bureaucrats and oligarchs who have been hiding in the back rooms and behind the curtain the whole time, because at the end of the day, again, they're going to serve somebody. We pray that they intentionally serve God. We pray that they are vessels of grace rather than wrath. But we've certainly seen the fruits of wrath for the past several years under Joe Biden, unless you have a completely different ethic and you're not, so into like the pro-life movement and all that stuff, which some Christians aren't. But without digressing too far, that's my statement. And the reason it was on my mind is because Palm Sunday, I'm just trying to imagine what that must have looked like at the time. Jesus being hailed as the King of Israel when there was already a king, supposedly. His name was King Herod. I had the odd luck of preaching my first Palm Sunday sermon in 2021. And so January 6th had already happened. I was like, January 6th is actually a pretty good image of what the triumphal entry of Jesus Christ in Jerusalem might have looked to some people at the time. You can split it either way. The people who were excited about him coming were hoping that mostly peaceful demonstration was going to see through a changing of the guard. And then, of course, what really happened is very similar to what happened in J6, which is, Jesus Christ came in with all of his people to make a peaceful demonstration. Some things got out of hand, and they all got in trouble. Except it was much more severe for the ringleader of that triumphal entry. So that's all to say, Palm Sunday was like a very transgressive image, an event. What happened there was very political in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of esoteric stuff going on there too, by the way, with the waving palms, which are symbols of wisdom. So, the ancient tradition of the wise divine kings of Israel, like Solomon, who made wisdom his bride. I mean, there's some deep Christological stuff going in that. All the Christological psalms that are so-called prophecies of Jesus Christ, you also have to remember they're like written about Solomon in the moment. David's writing about his son. Solomon's writing about himself, but he says, I'll tell you a decree from the Lord. He told me, today you have become my son. Those are Solomon's words. So, these are things he believed about himself. And, Solomon wasn't perfect in his kingdom. His period of kingship wasn't perfect insofar as it ended sort of in disaster. But the subsequent kings were not quite as wise, nor as divine, shall we say. until Jesus Christ came along, and that's why they whipped out those palms. It was a sign of tabernacles. It was a sign of many things. So there's a lot of esoteric stuff going on because they believed that Jesus represented their ideal vision of what Israel would be, and is based on ancient things. So, you know, Christianity, as the movement that Jesus started in his ministry, so many people like to frame it as like a liberal progression from Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, or Talmudic Judaism. Sorry, Babylonian Judaism. Sorry, there's someone in the road. I can't see what's going on. But anyway, it wasn't that purely. Some things were loosened up, but from Jesus's perspective, they were loosed because it wasn't in the original program. So he was what we would call an originalist, to like make an American analogy. Jesus was an originalist, and he's always dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees as these different schools, and saying that they don't quite get it, they're not quite orthodox. The Bible never mentions the Essenes, who would have been the most conservative group there. You check out the Dead Sea Scrolls, you realize that they're saying a lot of things that Jesus was saying. They had a very similar approach to things. So that's all to say, you know, while the Pharisees and Sadducees were rather progressive in their own way, somewhat conservative in their own way, at the end of the day, the group that Jesus agreed with the most, the Essenes, was even more conservative. They're never mentioned, which has led some scholars to believe that, well, probably they're not mentioned because the assumption is that this was the sect that Jesus represented and was rolling with, you know, and that John the Baptist originally emerged from, and that Jesus was likely a disciple of, and you know, was the Messiah and the Melchizedek divine priest that was promised in that story. So anyway, I'm getting to my destination. I call these musings because like they're not linear. I just kind of free float. I just think out loud, and if I don't connect any points, because I know I started talking about Palm Sunday in politics, just ask me questions in the comments and I'll get more in there. So, oh, and I see that Maureen has a problem with the economics. It's funny, I think people need to, you know, think less about like the immediate economic consequences. And I know it's tough, like when your guy is in office, you always want to side with him. I don't really have a guy per se. I mean, I'm usually pretty private about who I voted for, only because it's nicer to be able to play the option, if possible, of talking to people on the level and not getting partisans. And so the reason I mention that is because throughout every presidency, they've all made promises, and I've just been patient. Whether I voted for the person or not, you have to be patient because there are too many factors in the economy to purely think that one method or one ideology is just going to work exactly the way you expected. So if you're for tariffs, great. You still have no idea how other factors are going to play in, and the same applies to if you don't. So I mean, like we're a week into this. What's just interesting about it is we do know how taxation works through history, because it has a great history of people rebelling against it, and against far lower tax rates at that. Tariffs we don't know as much about because it's relatively newer approach, but we know how it works in America, how it worked in the 18th, especially 19th centuries. We have no reason to think that's going to be a disaster. Of course, there'll be other factors. I'm very curious to see how it's all going to turn out. But again, try to parking. Yeah, just try to stay optimistic. Pray that God's will be done. You know, if God wills that we have a hard time economically, like what are we going to do? Some people get so upset about this, you would think that they're about to whip out rifles and start marching. You know, I'm in New England, so a lot of the protesters here like have very violent rhetoric. You know, some of you are out in the Bible Belt, and you know, maybe you don't know what like a predominantly leftist environment can be like, but it gets pretty violent. It's not the most tolerant place. I've heard all about what the Bible Belt is like, you know, and how it can be intolerant towards people like LGBTQ people. So what I expected the Bible Belt to be like, I can pretty much say is what New England is like in terms of rhetoric and intolerance of like other viewpoints. You know, like conservatism, just with the added wrinkle that like yesterday's liberalism is likely to be more conservative than today's liberalism, and tomorrow's liberalism will be even further left than today's. So, you know, I was always a liberal myself, and, you know, even as a Catholic, which is a more conservative religion, I'm still theologically quite liberal. I just have a liberal tendency in my theology because I like to read with a wide lens. So, you know, people don't always like how, not how loose, but how open my viewpoint can be towards things. Because again, a lot of this economic stuff, you have to widen the lens and look at history and see what worked and what didn't. And then it's just a crapshoot whether we're going to have similar conditions and whether things will work. But every president I've ever lived through tries to make little changes, and there's big ripples. So it doesn't surprise me what's going on now. At another time, we'll talk more about Christian economics and the types of ripples that they created, whether it's like distributism or whether it's some of the more intentionally political Christian movements. There's a lot of really interesting experiments that happened in the Christian movement over the past 2,000 years. So if you're interested in economic equality, or even equity as they call it now, you might be surprised how many times that experiment has been tried and all the varying results. It's a really fun study. So I'm going to head out. And I can't, sorry Maureen, I can't really read everything that you're saying because you're saying so much. I see the capitals. I'm a little, but it sounds like maybe your anger. You know, I appreciate your passion for everything. I'm gonna go do my gig, and thanks for tuning in. God bless, and y'all lift up the Lord, and it is right and thankful to give thanks for all things. Thanks for listening. God bless.